Okay, Branden.
Okay, Drew.
All right, here we are. Well, I want to start off this week. Happy anniversary.
Did I miss it?
Today?
Not my wife.
No.
The election. You
Yes.
just remembered. Thank you.
Happy 1
Great,
year.
great year. Yes.
So tell me, it's been a year. I was thinking about it 2 weeks ago, and then when I woke up this morning, I looked at the date, and I went, "Holy doodle! It's been a year."
Yeah, that flew by actually. Eh?
What do you think? What's happened in the last year?
Not much. I say that's part jokingly, but part true. Like nothing's really changed in the country. Like not much. Nobody's like, oh, you know what? Good to see our economy booming. Good to see everything's getting cheaper. Nothing actually has changed. Politically, of course, things have changed. We, as of yesterday, have a now official majority government. More of the same, but world events, right? Like there's been some wild things happen, but a few things happen. But that's just to be expected, I suppose.
So here we are. Today is the first full day of Liberal Majority Day. I had to laugh. So last week when they tabled their motion to reconstitute committees, so now they're going from 5 Liberal MPs to 7 Liberal MPs, and effectively they're going to be able to run committees. We touched on that briefly. But I had to laugh that they introduced the motion and started debating the motion even before the new members of parliament were sworn in. Like, I thought for sure they might have waited like a week, but man, like it's about consolidating power. And I believe last night might have been the first committee. There was a committee happening after the vote happened. And I think they immediately went into camera. And, as you know, we can't talk about things that happen in camera, but this happened faster than I thought they would.
Yeah, you know what? They can't build things, but they can move with unbeatable speeds or whatever the prime minister's line was. Yeah, I was unhosted yesterday, and maybe I just wasn't expecting. All of a sudden, to start the day, they start walking in the new MPs. And typically, I was by-election. It's right before question period. You get like everybody in there. Everyone's all excited. It's like a really cool experience. They just voided that for the 3 new Liberal MPs and did it when the House was relatively empty for a pure purpose of passing a vote just an hour and a half later or something like that, to time allocate. So the first vote for these 3 new MPs was to time allocate a motion reconstituting committees. I mean, it's their right to do so. They do have them. They have a majority of seats, but the speed in which they acted to do that, and then more swiftly, as soon as it passed at 8:30 or whatever time the vote was last night, go to committee, be like, nah, never mind, we're done here.
Yeah.
We're taking the reins on that committee, and we're going to experience it today. I guess Thursday at Environment. Every committee is going to have this, but yeah, that was a rapid, unexpected pace. Elections Canada got back pretty quick, and then they did not waste any time taking control. But you know what? Now when they achieve nothing, they have to wear it.
Good point. Very good point. So you've been funny as of late, actually, in the House. You had a couple good lines. So yesterday you had a member statement right before question period, and you highlighted the fact that Justin Trudeau makes Mark Carney look like the more fiscally responsible one, because Carney's deficit, I believe, is over $90 billion, and I think he's even grown the public service by like 7%. Talk to us quickly here. You talk about the size of the debt and the deficit a lot. Like, why does it actually matter?
Now, in fairness, the deficit is not actually 90 billion. It was 90 billion in net new spending. The deficit's only like close to 80 billion. So just in fairness, which is still the largest deficit in Canadian history outside of COVID times. Now, why this matters? We all could run deficits in our lives forever, but eventually Visa, MasterCard, American Express, whatever company you use is going to come knocking on the door. And for those that we borrow money from in international markets, we pay $55 billion this year. $1 billion in interest on the debt that we have accrued as a nation. Unfortunately, we only collect about $53 billion in the GST, the 5% that we pay on everything across this country. So when you take that equivalent, I jokingly call it the debt servicing tax now because it's roughly equivalent. That's money that we're not spending in transfers to provinces to fix our broken healthcare system. It's not money going to our rural municipalities to get wastewater and make sure that we can grow economically and build new houses and build new businesses. It's money not going to our roads. It's money not going to defense. It's money that we are sending just abroad to a whole bunch of international bankers and not actually investing in our country. That's why deficits matter. The numbers they're all made up billions, and these are fictional sounding numbers, but at the end of the day, it's a huge amount of what we collect in tax revenue in the federal government. Instead of spending it on ourselves, we end up just sending it abroad to somebody else. And that's why we need fiscal responsibility, because what we're doing right now is just insane.
Yeah. So when we talk about, the size of the deficit or the debt, I as a conservative, I think it's incredibly important. But how do we make it more politically sexy so that people actually understand this is a challenge our country faces? It's only getting worse, it seems. How do we reach out to Canadians and actually get them a little fired up about this? Because it's so fine for you and I to be upset, and you go into the House and you give a speech or you ask questions about it or whatever, but until it's a mainstream conversation happening out there in the real world, I don't know if we're going to change the tone on this.
Yeah. It's tough. That's why I compare it to the GST, because it's something tangible. It's the 5% that you pay on whatever you're buying, more or less, in this country. You rather than think about, that's going to help, build a new hospital in my community sometime down the road. That's going to pay a bunch of international money lenders money instead. So that's why I'm trying to connect it to something that is more real. We have a huge debt problem in this country, not just our federal government. Like Carney and Trudeau, they all keep saying, we have the best debt to GDP ratio. We are a federation. We don't take into account all of our subnational governments. All of our provinces' debts combined with our federal debt changes that story. And then secondarily, perhaps why it's not as sexy or we all want to ignore the problem, is we have the highest household debt in the world.
I saw that. Yeah.
I think it's 101% of our GDP is debt right now. We are maxed on the credit cards, and that's because government policy has led to life being so expensive. The fact that rent is just insane. The fact that mortgage rates, with rising mortgage rates and expanding, ballooning housing prices, groceries, just life, people are racking up credit card, line of credit debt. We're living outside of our means, both in terms of individually and as government. Yeah. So it is, we all need to take a step back and realize where this starts. Unfortunately, it's often with government, and we're making things worse. Yeah.
So as Manitobans, we obviously pay attention to what happens back home. The Premier, Manitoba, did a couple things, or at least did a couple of interviews, and announced something that I thought was quite interesting. So let's start with the first one. So you wrote a very interesting Substack this last week on the Major Projects Office and the fact that the government actually hasn't repealed Bill C-69, which is, how big projects get assessed in this country. But the Premier came out and said, hey, Churchill, is now been referred as a project of national interest. But he said something interesting, that the Prime Minister had alluded to him that won't be happening unless if the province gets their act together and builds some sort of LNG pipeline terminal by 2030. And to the best of my knowledge, that had never been spoken about. And since then, nobody's really talked about it. What do you think?
I'm going to take the Premier at his word that the Fed said that. And if they did, that's crazy. I'd love to see that. When you look at previous LNG export terminus that has been built, particularly in BC, we're talking decade plus, closer to 2 decades. These are not fast projects purely from an infrastructure standpoint, but also more importantly, in the lengthy process we have in Canada, the regulatory hurdles that are in place for this to happen. It's just never going to happen. So to dangle this carrot that we'll get behind your little project there, Manitoba, but you got to do it by 2030 seems like just a clearly false promise. I don't know if it's sincere, and why I think it's really not sincere is there was an announcement a few weeks ago from the federal government in somewhat collaboration with the provincial government, because they'd have to transfer the provincial crown land in the Seal River watershed to create a national park reserve. It's unclear what exactly it'll be. This has been kind of bantered about for a little while, but to see it put in writing so much more clearly and have it on the website advanced as kind of step 4 of 5, they want to do this. And it's 50,000 square kilometers in northern Manitoba. It's a massive area. And listen, I'm all for protecting our land and water. Don't get me wrong. That, if you look at a map, there's no way an LNG pipeline is getting to Churchill except through that massive swath of land. There's just no way. So this is a government that's doing one thing of this hand and then saying over here, you have under 4 years to build and create the conditions for natural gas to be exported when you can't actually get a pipeline there. Never mind all the hurdles that still exist. Like, come on.
It reminds me of the whole Bipole 3 debacle, that happened years ago, where they had, send the hydro line all the way down the western side of the province and then loop back.
Yeah.
Because something very similar, the left hand wasn't talking to the right hand, and then they decided, they were going to try to pitch this World UNESCO Heritage, site on the other side of the lake. But the other thing the premier said was, he said, no details yet, that the province of Manitoba is going to ban social media for kids. Now, we don't know the age categories. Obviously, we don't know which platforms. We don't know the enforcement mechanism. I'm not entirely confident the province of Manitoba, could theoretically sue or take, X or YouTube to court. But let's set aside the fact that there's no details, but just the underlying question: should we be concerned about the amount of time and potentially risks of kids being on social media? And the other issue, as conservatives, we're always worried about big government, stepping into people's lives. Now, I'm not expecting a black and white answer today, but walk me through your thinking on how we should be looking at this.
Yeah. Ooh, this one could take a second. I'm glad the premier. I'm glad somebody brought this up. It is an important conversation. My oldest kid is just over 2. So I got, in theory, a decade till this becomes a personal problem. But I've been consuming a lot of parenting books and monitoring my own activities. Like when I'm with my kids, am I on my phone? And I've throttled back my own social media use. Not quite 100, but awfully close, because I want to try to model for further down the line for my own kids what it means to be technologically advanced. And watching my daughter, like how it's so intuitive. They can figure out a phone, not the app necessarily at this point, but it's clearly a problem that, I think there's sensational headlines, but the research does somewhat back it up that, and at least in my assessment, social media was a net benefit and is now a net ill to society. I think it's generally a problem. Adults really aren't handling cell phone use, iPad use, social media platform use, internet use, broadly speaking, very well.
So just not to point out, but the fact that we're putting these videos,
it's ironic
on social media.
Yeah. I know. I understand the irony. In my world right now, as a means of communications, it's a necessary way. But I think back from it, like I started Facebook in high school, the end of high school. You actually got to see what somebody else in your life was doing. Like that was the point of Facebook back then, and interconnectivity of people's lives. And to some extent, I'm sure it's still used that way. But there are clearly many problems, but focusing on children in particular, it's the parents' job to parent. It's not the government's job to parent. So Australia is going to be the first test case of this. They recently banned for under 16. Now they're a nation state. So yeah, Manitoba, I don't know how a province could do this. I think if anybody's going to do this, the feds would need to be the one doing it. But I think it's a conversation we need to have as adults. I think we also need to engage with kids on this, right? Like they're the ones, and there's been surveys and research done, but we need to understand what the pitfalls are, what the benefits are before we make a drastic decision like banning. We also need to identify what is social media. Is it the big platforms we think of? Is YouTube comments? Is it the Score app feed on the hockey game? Like how big and broad do we make this? What sort of privacy implications? Like how do you actually enforce this? So I'm very skeptical of big tech in a very big way, just as skeptical about big government. And I want to leave as much power in parents' hands as we can. But at the end of the day, I see how difficult it is to deal with a 2-year-old. I don't know how it's going to be to deal with a 14-year-old daughter someday down the road. Now, things could be drastically different by then, but I see more net negatives with the perfectionism of social media, the fakeness of it all, the bullying. There's so many negatives, and I don't want to take away these potential positives that do exist for certain kids. So again, a blanket ban it's not my gut shot position. But I think we need to have a conversation. I think we're fortunate that Australia is doing this because we're going to be able to see some results before perhaps we have to make a decision. But I think we need to start this conversation now. But the other alternative is, how the algorithmic nature of our life right now is a problem. We are continuously fed down certain paths, certain products. And once you go down that path, it seems very difficult to change. So you could, the other approach could be having the platforms alter their algorithms in a way that could be more positive for children. I think it's clearly not optimal right now for kids. This is not helping their self-image. This is not helping them with personal responsibility of their own family's finances when they're being consistently bombarded with targeted advertising. Like, there's so many aspects of it that the platform, in theory, should be trying to deal with. Again, hard for us to dictate what algorithms a giant tech company has to do. And frankly, these are the most powerful people in the world.
Yeah.
That any sort of ban is going up against people that have a very vested interest in the opposite of that. So it's a fight, but I think more importantly, it's a conversation that I really hope we sincerely have soon, both in Manitoba and across Canada.
Sounds like you should be writing maybe a Substack on this.
Yeah, I could do that. I've thought about this a lot more of late, actually.
Flush out your ideas.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's end with week 2 now of Keyboard Ken. Okay, so we posted a video of your member statement the other day, about the size of the debt and deficit. Keyboard Ken thinks that we should introduce a wealth tax, which is, one of the favorite things is just if we just somehow magically just taxed a whole bunch of rich people, somehow this would work and wouldn't, make Canada less of an attractive place to live and do business. So answer me this. Do you think if we just taxed a bunch of wealthy people, who knows what that threshold would be, but do you think that would just magically, disappear our size of the deficit? Or I'll phrase it another way, or do you just think it's another way for government to get their hands on more money rather than make tough decisions such as actually focusing on running the programs they do in a more efficient way?
Yeah, good question. Because we kind of already have a wealth tax. We have a progressive tax system in place. We have an exodus of talent, entrepreneurship, and money leaving our country already. There would be, if you implemented, maybe somehow didn't project it and implemented a retroactive or on the day of tax, that if you have this much in your bank account, then we're going to take 3/4 of it. It'd be an influx of cash for the government. Those people would immediately leave and hire the best accountants to either sue the government, try to get out of this, put their money in tax havens. Like, it's such a lazy policy to think that that is going to solve the woes of our financial situation. We have $90 billion in net new spending compared to last year, $80 billion, over $1 trillion in debt. We need to be more responsible with other people's money. And taking more of people that have been successful, and we shouldn't begrudge people for being successful, is a backwards way of having long-term economic success in this country.
Okay, well, there you have it. Okay, folks, I guess we'll talk next week. We'll also have an update on whatever today's fiscal update is, and we'll, I guess, dive into the details on whatever what do you want to call it? What's the new fund? Sovereign Investment Fund or something?
Yeah, that's a boondoggle right now, but let's talk more about that later.
Okay, thanks, folks.